Philip Edmonds, in his essay Tilting at Windmills, published by the University of Adelaide Press, noted, "Up until the late 1960s, the story of Australian literary magazines was one of continuing struggle against the odds and of the efforts of individuals such as Clem Christensen, Stephen Murray Smith and Max Harris. During that time, the magazines played the role of enfant terrible, creating a space where unpopular opinions and writers were allowed a voice. The magazines have very often been ahead of their time, and some of the agendas they have pursued have become central to representations where once they were marginal. Broadly, little magazines have often been more influential than their small circulations would first indicate, and my argument here is that they have played a valuable role in the promotion of Australian literature." In the 1970s, these are the magazines that published poetry. By the mid-1970s, many new magazines emerged. Tom Woodruff arrived in Melbourne 1970, went to the Aquarius Festival in Nimbin, began chanting poetry with musicians, then went back to West Melbourne Open House, had Monday nights at The Commune, with open band Poor Tom's Poetry Band, several incarnations of which performed at The Sunflower, The New Commune, Vince and Wendy's, John Howley's. This was before Cafe Jam-In or Carringbush Library, Cafe Yachts, St George's Road Fire Station Squat, Fitzroy Gardens, Veep, Moomba, etc., which is when people suggested that no one listens, put it on paper, so street poetry and dial-a-poem were born. Every morning from 5:30 a.m. till 10 a.m, thousands of sheets of poetry were handed out on Swanson Street, some of which exist at the State Library under Enthemera.
Straight, tall, straight, tall, straight, asphalt, steel, cement, tall, steel, asphalt, cement, tall, cement, asphalt, steel, tall, cement, steel, asphalt, tall, straight, tall, straight, tall, straight.
I'm talking to Peter Sullivan about the early years in Melbourne, the mid-70s to the late 70s of the Poets Union. Peter was lucky enough to be embroiled in the radical poets in those days. And Peter, you told me that you actually began by a connection to theatre, Barry Dickens.
Yeah. Well, basically, I met Barry in Carlton, really. Barry was living at a place called the Manse in Princes Street with an artist called John Bell, who actually was quite a famous artist. Is quite fairly well known.
And became a film director.
No, it's not the same guy.
Not the same guy.
No, that's John Bell, the actor who was from the New Theatre and
Sydney guy, I think, anyway.
Shakespeare.
Yes, that's
Bell Shakespeare. Different John Bell.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
we can cut this.
that's another story. So I went round to the manse one day, and as lots of people did in those days, just sort of dropping in and out. And Barry said to me, "Oh, do you like painting pictures?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, well, let's paint one on the back wall."
He'd met Barry Dickens and the manse.
Yeah.
Now this, I imagine, is about 75, 76.
Yeah, maybe a bit earlier than that.
Earlier than that.
Yeah, maybe sort of 73, 74.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, back then.
One day it will come screaming for you and me, a stridency resounding down rain-soaked streets, seasonless, hourless. Masked, supine, strapped down and in shock beneath the white roof, we will be only distantly aware of the jiggling equipment, the rush of intersections. The slow parting walls of traffic and our siren rising.
That's me. I was inspired by Tom the Street Poet, as he was known, and joined his merry band of poetry proselytizers. My first piece of public poetry was one word: poem. Now, leading up to 1977, that's when the Poets Union formed. You had quite a bit of contact with the poets by that stage.
Yeah, well, Barry used to drag me along to readings at 87A in Footscray, the Footscray Community Arts Centre.
That Robert Hughes was running.
Robert Hughes ran. He was a poet as well. And I met people there. I met Alex Salinich, Pio, Jas Duke, quite a few people, and I'd never really met.
Yeah.
Really, that was probably the biggest concentration, and I wasn't really writing much myself at that stage. But
you had made an acquaintance with Eric Beach at that stage?
Not at that stage, so that came later. So a few years later, so it must have been somewhere, around 1978, 79, somewhere around there.
Because the Poetry Union formed in 77.
Oh no, it wouldn't have been. It would have been 76.
Yeah.
And I was invited to do some lighting at the Pram Factory back theatre by Barry Dickens. And he was doing a play with 4 other playwrights, and among the other playwrights was Eric Beach did a short play, Stephen Master, Gig Ryan, and somebody else, can't remember who they all were.
Yeah, but Eric did a short play.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he also did some odd bits of concrete poems.
Later on.
Later on.
Which I didn't know about until we found it in the book.
That side of Eric I didn't know either.
Yeah, well, not something he did a lot of.
Okay, but
yeah, so I met Eric, and Eric said, "Oh, why don't you come to a barbecue? There's a whole lot of poets getting together down at Rosemary Nisson's place down in Beaumaris." So at that stage I was working as a carpenter, and I had this van, which was like a closed furniture van in the back kind of thing. And a whole lot of people decided they needed a lift, which included Pio and Yelchi and Eric, and they all hopped in the back of the van. And I remember Yelchi saying that it was like they were gorillas or something. They were sort of in the back of this van.
An art attack.
An art attack, yeah. So we went down and had a nice time at the barbecue, and there was a bit of reading going on. I think Billy Marshall was down there, Neil Murray, a few other people. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of energy around. I think all those people had just kind of gotten together, really, around that time, and really decided to do something. So the Poets Union kind of came out of that, and there was a book that came out called Chuk Chuk, which was a self-published, the collective kind of publishing thing.
Yep.
Had been going, so they put stuff together in that. There was a whole kind of collective of people. I think Cassie Messenger was part of that.
There were now 5 poetry venues a week to choose from in Melbourne.
Poet for sale, a real live one, yeah. Yes, a real live person for sale. I have my values anyway. Clothing, no extra charge, of course. Buy me now, go on. Buy me now. Save yourself. Get a gnome for your home. Or an angel in a taxi cab.
The U Show, the first big show I organised. And everybody got some pay.
A fairy in your dairy milking petty cat. All you gotta do is buy me and I'm yours. All yours. No extra charge. And my hair is real, I tell you. It's real. I beat as I sleep, as I dream. You could have me today. No deposit. And I'm interest free too.
The first time I remember reading was, basically I read at the Albion Hotel at readings that Jeffrey Eggleston was running, and then Jeffrey asked me if I wanted to be in the National Poetry Festival, which was in at Montsalvat.
The Montsalvat Festival went for quite a number of
Well,
years.
yeah, Jeffrey did quite a lot of that.
Yeah, yes.
That work, keeping that going. Yeah. And at the same time, I'd been publishing poems in 9 to 5. So I had those poems, so I basically read those poems at Montserrat.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
The second Montserrat Poetry Festival in 1977 opened with a star-studded women's reading on a list of the poetry stars of the day and still today. In 1977, Eric Beach wrote an open letter to Australian poets regarding the genesis and development of the Australian Poets Union. August 1977. The Poets Union is born. Poet Robert Hughes, first chair of the Poets Union.
Poet for sale, a real live one, yeah. Yes, a real live person for sale.
1977, I moved into 35A Brunswick Street, Fitzroy, above a shop with entry from the back lane. Peter Freddie Tiernan helped me buy a tabletop offset printing machine and a plate maker. For 5 years, I printed many thousands of poetry sheets, posters and chapbooks.
Yes, a real live person for sale. I have my values anyway. Clothing, no extra charge, of course. Buy me now, go on. Buy me now. Save yourself. Get a gnome for your home. Or an angel in a taxi cab. Or a corpse in a London bus. Or a fairy in your dairy milking petty cash. All you gotta do is buy me and I'm yours, all yours. No extra charge. And my hair is real, I tell you, it's real. I beat as I sleep, as I dream. You could have me today, no deposit. And I'm interest free too. Interest free. Isn't that enough? Take me and I will love you. Love you. Love you. Love you. And then eat you. Eat you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Pete, I've got there's a great photo of you with 9 to 5 birthday candles.
Yeah.
Who was at that afternoon tea?
Pio was there, Yoshi was there, Celia, Pio's sister, was there with her friend, whose name I can't remember, and Lynn Boughton.
I'm talking to Lynn Boughton today, an Australian poet, English woman who arrived as a young woman to Australia and has been a large involvement in the poetry community in Melbourne. Now we'll start with that book, Lynn. When did that come out, roughly?
I'm not good with years, Kenny, but 2004.
And the publishers?
Skek Text, who are Lish and Paul.
Oh,
Skek.
terrific. Now, Lynn, what was your first connection to poetry here in Melbourne?
I'd say it was about 1978 when I did a degree in literature at VUT. John McLaren was the head of department then, and he was into all the poets that I'd started reading, like Eric Beach, Pio, ACR, Yelchi, Mel Morgan, and the list goes on.
Yes. And how did it begin? Did you go to a poetry reading? Did you, for instance, can you maybe remember the first time you stood up in public and read?
Oh, it was a lot of years till that happened, Ken. I was always involved in the poetry scene, but I was very shy. Still am.
Yes.
I find it really hard to read publicly. Like it, but find it hard. Well, I reckon the first time would have been at the Rochester Castle.
That makes sense. It was a long time before you actually read. What were you doing before that? I understand you had connection to magazines.
Yeah. Well, around about that time I started going to the city and looking in all the little alternative bookshops, and I found a book by Mel Morgan called Poem Stone. That was the first book I came across. And he'd made some reference to a Pio. And then I met, I was going out with a guy who was a photographer, and he was friends with Barry McDonald, and Barry McDonald was involved with 9 to 5. So then I started getting access to other poets, different poets, more poets. And as you know, 9 to 5 was about work.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I worked out there was a bit of a dichotomy between the poets I liked, who were more performance and than on the page.
That's interesting. Okay. Did you find there was a political element to the poetry being produced in Melbourne? 9 to 5, for instance, work.
It was a work ethic magazine, which was great because it not only was it work related, it wasn't your run-of-the-mill type workers either. Could be anybody from cleaners to Jazz Duke, who was in the public service, I think, then.
Yes. Very famous for his shit poem.
Shit poem. Actually, speaking of shit poem, at the same time that I started meeting all these poets, I was also involved in the newspaper on campus. And at that time, I remember that when the shit poem came out, there was a bit of, somebody in the ABC wanted it banned or something like that. So we wrote an article saying, oh fuck, we said shit. In our newspaper, and did a presentation of Jazz Duke's The Shit Poem, which is a great poem.
Yes.
I still love that poem.
Now, this poem is about the work I actually do, and it's called Shit Poem. I'm in the shit business. No kidding, I really am. I work in the sewage department. I do all graphs and flowcharts and conclusions. Today I was sitting at my desk trying to explain the dissolved air flotation process, where streams of little bubbles are released into a tank full of sewage to float the suspended solids up to the surface to be skimmed off. But what I was really thinking about was the last time. The canteen cook caters to the ethnic multitudes by putting on Italian eats most days. I was thinking of ravioli with meat sauce. But all the time I was writing things like the sludge produced by this process is grey-brown in colour and does not produce offensive odours provided anaerobic conditions can be prevented. The sludge is really composed of my used ravioli, and the bosses used steak, and your used hamburger, and the vegetarians used brown rice, all mixed up together. And when it gets into this state, no one wants to know about it except me. I don't find shit offensive, most people do. They can't wait to push the button or pull the chain or something, and then they think the shit has vanished into the centre of the earth. It hasn't really, it just floats up somewhere else. However, it's all biodegradable. I reckon most people think that shit is the most deadly poison on the face of the earth. They'd rather face 10 tonnes of plutonium than half a bucket of shit, even their own. No curse in the English language is complete without the word shit included in it somewhere. Lunchtime arrived. I ate my ravioli. I had a shit. It was brown in colour. I felt a whole lot better.
With 95, since we're on that, what were you doing? Proofreading, collating?
I was helping sometimes put it together. I remember one night helping Pi using the big guillotine at Strawberry Press, and the little room the guillotine was in was so small you had to reach up, pull down the lever and kick the door open. So really I was involved a little bit with the, the putting together of the magazine, sometimes helping collate it, because there were a band of people like Yelchi, Pi, Barry, Jazz, I'm sure it's the Leah.
All volunteers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ray Cassar, who was also a poet, photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend Kevin Wood, who was the photographer, he used to submit stuff too. So it was a great magazine because it wasn't just poems, it was also photography, it was also concrete
Poetry, yes. Which Pi and that group, Jazz, who sort of is a vocal concrete artist.
And then the poets themselves often just chipped in on jobs. So I think with a sort of editorial kind of group back then, Pi would get the magazine printed and it'd be in boxes of unfolded, unstapled print-offs of pages, and we'd put all the pages together in the right order and put the covers on and spend a whole night doing that.
How cool.
To constant reruns of the Blues Brothers.
Oh, that's
they were
great.
pretty great nights, really. Lots of fun, really. It wasn't like work at all, really. Not work, which is interesting for a poetry book about work.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and all of the covers were all handmade, really. They generally, well, some of them were printed, but usually all the artwork was done by someone around. Pi did a lot of covers. I did a few. Other people did other photos for covers. It was a kind of a movable feast.
Yeah.
As far as that went. They were pretty great nights, really. Lots of fun, really. It wasn't like work at all. Hilarious.
Oh, that sounds fun, yeah.
It was fun, yeah.
Now, Peter, you did some concrete poetry yourself? And did those ones that we've got, did you exhibit them or did they go in a book?
Yeah, they were in an exhibition. It was some years later, after I sort of came back to Melbourne, but they were Pete Spence sort of helped me put together that exhibition, and I also put together an exhibition of Pete Spence's work and a whole collective of other people at the National Theatre in those days. So in the windows of the National Theatre for the St Kilda Festival. I curated that. that particular show. So yeah, there was another point of energy, I suppose. Yeah, early 90s really.
Yes,
Then,
by that stage.
by that stage.
But you did tell me before that you can remember your first poem that was in 95.
Yeah.
And it was the second edition, that you thought you'd be in the first.
Yeah.
Tell me the story why it wasn't in the first and why it was in the second edition.
Oh, well, I was working at a place called Western Youth Welfare in those days as a youth worker, and I met a guy called Barry McDonald, who turns out is a poet. He's still a poet. And he said, oh, why don't you put something in for 9 to 5? We're doing stuff about work, because I think he was a member of the collective at that stage. And so I gave him a couple of poems that I'd written, and but I didn't realise that he wasn't the editor. The editor was actually Pi-O. And so they didn't get published, and I didn't sort of think about it. And then Barry said, I think you need to talk to Pi. And I said, oh, okay. So at some stage I met Pi again and said, oh, what's happened with the poems? And he said, oh, look, you just needed to talk to me about it. Then I know who you are and I can say something about you and introduce you and all that. So he said, by the way, they were great poems. And he published them.
You had a connection with Going Down Swinging that went from about 80s, somewhere in the 80s to somewhere in the 90s, is that right?
I think that might have been even late 70s perhaps.
Yes, yeah.
Because I
Well,
remember
it would have been in the
Myron.
late 70s, yeah. With Going Down Swinging, that wasn't just poetry, was it? It was also
short
prose.
stories, prose, interviews. They were quite well known for their interviews. And they were also known for publishing not only people who had already been published, but new writers or new innovative writing. Very exciting. I remember Myron coming around on his push bike really out of breath and very excited because he and Kevin had just maybe decided they were going to put this new magazine out that was going to be different to everything else.
These two editors were...
Kevin Brophy and Myron Lysenko.
Okay.
Look, it was amazing in those times, Ken. You could go to a reading any night of the week in Melbourne.
Now, Lynn, La Mama, what was it like reading there?
It was lovely because it's very intimate, as you know. You know, you can be sitting on part of a play set too while you're reading. I remember somebody reading out of a coffin even one time at the moment. Was it Amy Bright? I can't remember, but anyway, it was a lovely venue because it was very intimate. Had a break at halfway through, so everybody got to mingle in the garden, sitting on the steps, having a wine. Yeah, it was lovely, Mama.
Did you feel confident?
Felt like a tribe to me. And one of the wonderful things about the tribe was that you could be a single parent and rock up to a reading, your child could come, they would be made to feel very welcome. A lot of people who had maybe some sort of disability, everybody was welcome. That was the wonderful thing about the poets. It wasn't a judgment, you know. Everybody had something to say and everybody was welcome to get up and say it. I remember Louise Craig's readings at Sambuca.
Oh, the Sambuca readings?
Yes,
Yep.
where you would, that was wonderful, where you would go and read and you'd get to have dinner there.
Yeah.
And your poem would be up on the blackboard for a week or so before you did the reading. That was a great... And the little book came out of that, the Sambuca Poets.
That's quite right.
Which was wonderful. Louise was a big player in the
late
scene.
80s to the mid 90s. Very important.
Great work ethic.
Great work
She was one of the editors when I did Going Down Swinging. So we'd go over to her place in Clifton Hill. She'd have picked up the mail and we'd go through all the submissions. Yeah, great worker, Louise, and very, very, very smart woman.
Now, there are other poets on the scene.
Yeah, well, what can I say? Eric Beach, fine poet, can write anything really. Yeah, I was very interested in people like Eric when I first got on the scene because they were like seemingly simple writers, but not really simple at all. Like quite, well, you know Eric, he's quite an intellectual.
Yes.
Shelton, the larrikin poet, supposedly, with his interesting speech code, he could read like he'd just come from the ABC.
Yes.
Or, you know, his famous poem about jail was So Cold, Brother. The
Cold in
mattresses
jail, yeah.
were thin as two tally-hos.
Yes.
So, yeah, a lot of people had the ability to read very, very different poems. You know, there were a lot of great women like Jenny Bolt, her poem about taking all the kids to the beach and smoking, looking for the dope. Lauren Williams, Mimi, of course, dear Mimi. She organised a lot of readings, Ken. You know? Well, she did the gig guide for a lot of readings.
Yes, she
so
did.
That's how we all got to know.
Mimi was a fabulous historian of the Melbourne poets with her collection. This history that we're doing wouldn't be possible without her collection. And, well, you know, it's dedicated to her. There are other older women poets in those days. Veenie Holmgren, Barbara Giles,
Yes.
Rosemary Nissen, Jennifer Strauss, very serious poets who were right behind the formation of the Poets Union. Linda Stevenson, there's a whole bunch of names that pretty much were important in the 70s and 80s, really big. But by the time the 90s, they were elderly women. Rosemary Nissen, she hung in there as a publisher too for a long time.
Abalone Press.
Yes, Abalone Press.
As you get older, you forget names.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
ridiculous.
Yeah,
I can think of faces. Janet Body.
Janet Body, yes.
Who is that?
Joan Scott.
Joan, that's who I was trying to think of. The Eltham poets.
Yes, the open mic concept.
Yeah. Often there'd be a feature or two features and then open mic. I found that very intimidating at first. But I guess you kind of get the hang of it and decide, I want to read a poem, you know. And then later it got to the blackboards where you would put your name down and read.
Did you go to Montserrat?
Yes, I did.
The poetry festival?
Yes, I did. Yeah. It was very exciting. Montserrat was very exciting. And it went for about 3 days.
Yes.
And so by the third day, people would be looking pretty washed out. I remember Shelton doing an interview on a plastic chair, and the plastic chair had heated up and it started sinking as he was reading. But yeah, I mean, they were the days, Kenny. They were the days.
Going to the various festivals. Did you get to Adelaide at all?
No, I never went to Adelaide, but I did go to Sydney. But unfortunately, I mean, there were heaps of Sydney poets. Nigel Roberts.
Yes.
The list goes on and on. Billy Marshall, Stone King.
Yes.
The list goes on and on and on. But unfortunately, there were no readings the 2 weeks that I was there. So that is what made Melbourne really remarkable. You could come to Melbourne any night of the week and trot along to a reading.
That's right.
Whereas Sydney, although they had lots of poets and guest readings, they were more
formal events.
Yeah, and more scheduled, you know, in time slots that you either missed or hit or miss.
It also brings to mind some of the other workers. We have people like Peter Freddie Tiernan, terrific poet, confident of Shelton.
Wonderful poet.
And
Wonderful poet.
he was a printer. He helped out the street poets with often paper. When I started, he got me a printing press and paper. Another is Paul Cullen, who was a friend of yours. And I probably met him through you, no doubt. He was a terrific sound recordist. So when Marita and I were doing Writers' Radio, People in Performance, Paul did the most beautiful sound collages for us. And at Radical Poets and Nightclub Poets, Paul was the sound man. So we had talented people from both ends of the spectrum.
And a quiet poet was Paul Cullen too, and a performer, you know, his sound stuff that he used to do. Yeah, God, we've been alive a long time, Ken. All the different, you know, like, it's not till we start talking you remember lots of it.
Well, it was like an open-air university for poets to rub shoulders, learn.
Yeah, but also a reaction to that precious poetry, you know, to the dusty, musty, fusty poetry.
Yes.
I was lucky to be at VUT when John McLaren was there because I did 3 years of literature. The first 2 years I wasn't really acknowledged or I didn't do very well, put it that way. Partly because I think the lecturers, although they were all wonderful, they were quite conservative. And then came John McLaren, who was so encouraging. So to me as a student, he was encouraging, also as a poet. Just generally, I mean, we became activists because of John McLaren. Not only writers, but also activists, you know. And he was doing Overland at his home with Shirley, his wife Shirley.
Performance poetry was derided by a lot of the academics for a long time.
It was. And that gets back to what I was talking about. My first 2 years at VUT, I used to put 9 to 5s under the lecturers' doors. And although I didn't feel like I was very successful, I remember one lecturer in particular, Dirk Van Hartop, used to try and encourage me to come to his tutorials because he knew I used to put the 9 to 5s under the door, and he didn't consider that real poetry. And I used to argue with him, of course, about that. And he was into the classics, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with the classics. You've got to know the classics.
They've got to be read.
Yeah. But, I remember I used to do it to be a bit wicked, you know. And then I met John McLaren, and his bookshelf was amazing. He had people like Eric Pye, Mal, your books. He had all the Melbourne Poets books on his shelves and was far more open to poetry in a non-musty, fusty, dusty way, you know. It wasn't until third year I started getting reasonable results. But also, VUT was a very exciting place because we used to, weekly, we used to get Barry Dickens plays put on. So there was the tie between the playwrights too and the poets, like John Romerell, Barry Dickens. There's some amazing writers. Anyway, I felt like the culture was so rich in those days, you know, and there was a lot of overlap between playwrights, poets, artists, poets, novelists, poets.
The cross-fertilisation was one of the important parts of it, so that now we have the youngsters in Melbourne accept that, poetry happens, you know. You think that the development of the poetry scene in Melbourne actually widened the general public's appreciation of the art form?
Well, I think it did, but it's hard to measure that sort of stuff.
It is.
Although, you know, we can measure it by people who were considered maybe performance poets, but they were equally as good on the page, and they started getting into universities and things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess it did expand.
Placed a lot of the growth of what we call performance poetry on what was already a national strain of bush poetry in Australia. Through my research, I've discovered there never was a country fair that didn't have a bush poet there declaiming, much in the vein of Lawson, Patterson, Gilmore, all those early Australian poets that developed a very open style.
But we had some of those too. We had Eddie, beautiful Eddie, who's recently left us, Alan Gregory, and they bordered on, you know, they had some of that.
Komnenos was probably the first I kind of thought, oh, he's been reading a lot of Australian poetry, and I asked him and he had. He said he loved it. He couldn't believe it was so easy to read.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an interesting poet in that he's, God, I found a book called The Baby Rap the other day, which would be about his daughter.
Yes. Yeah.
And also that place he had in the city,
Zacpina, yeah.
Yeah, where they used to have readings.
Well, Lynn, I know it's only been a short chat, but it's so interesting talking to you because it's often the people behind the scenes. Volunteer, love of the art, really.
Well, we all do it for the love of it. We certainly don't do it for the money, Ken. And it's like a religion, I guess, you know. If you're really crazy about it, it's like a religion.
Yes, but we don't have any miracles.
Well, we have some miracles. What about, speaking of miracles, Hannah and...
Kevin and Hannah.
Kevin and Hannah.
Being struck by lightning
Being
on Torquay
struck
Beach.
by lightning on the way to a reading.
And lived.
And being on the news that night.
Yes, yes.
So there's been some miracles.
Kevin and Hannah with Black Pepper have been terrific supporters
For a long time, yes.
of the Melbourne and Australian poetry scene, and serious publishers at the same time.
Published some wonderful people like
They-
Jennifer Harrison.
Homer Reith, Peter
Yes.
Merck, Ian McBride.
Yes.
Bunch. And the poets I'm interviewing, simply because there's so many of us, I thought I'll go for the workers mostly and the venue conveners. That's why I thought today I have to talk to Lynn Boughton, because her background covers all the years that we're interested in. So Lynnie, can we wrap up
With a little poem?
A poem, yeah.
Okay. All right. You do that. I would have died of embarrassment if somebody had asked me that a few years ago. This poem's called Night Fandango. You hang like silk, babe, more legs than angle. Fuck the night fandango, full moon, light shoots, make me violin string breathless.
Thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you, Ken.
Mazel tov!